Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Amina Muyalabatic, and I'm very happy to be hosting today's webinar, Balancing Act, Thriving Amidst College Stressors with Sister Menahal Begawala. This is a Muslim Minute webinar, which we're organizing today, alhamdulillah. It's an initiative of the Wallaway Foundation, set up by Imran Nanlawala and Habib Quadri to provide bite-sized gems to educate, inspire, and empower the Muslim youths. Muslim Minute is also present on social media. You can follow us on Instagram, for example, at Muslim Minute, where we have created some amazing videos, including Quran gems and issues related to Palestine, all tailored for the youth to benefit from, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, today I'm very happy to introduce and to welcome our speaker, Sister Menahal Begawala, who is a licensed mental health counselor in New York and New Jersey. She has a background in Islamic studies and is passionate about promoting mental, emotional, and physical wellness through an Islamic lens. Sister Menahal has worked in diverse mental health settings and has undergone various training to gain a deeper understanding of trauma and its treatment. She recognizes the profound impact of trauma on mental and physical health and how it can lead to patterns of behavior that keep individuals stuck. Menahal has combines her expertise in trauma with the skills she has learned from the Gottman Institute to work with couples. She co-authored the Islamic reference guide for the Gottman method, a companion to the New York Times bestseller, The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. Her goal is to bring the community together and help individuals and the community heal from trauma and improve their relationships while incorporating Islam. Sister Menahal is certified in sensory motor psychotherapy and EMDR modalities to treat trauma. Sister Menahal, I'm very happy to welcome you today. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Muslim Minute webinar.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Alhamdulillah. So let's dive right in. So as we're talking about, inshallah, today about the stress and how it affects college students, and especially the Muslim college students, which is the focus of our webinar today. I'm very interested in knowing in general, like what are some of the distinct stressors, things that are let's say, stressing or making Muslim youth very anxious and worried, so to say, in the USA, especially when you compare them, let's say, to their peers, and how we can better understand these challenges that the Muslim youth are facing.
Sure. So I'll start just with the remembrance of Allah. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So to start, the question is, how do we understand the distinct stressors that college students face now? And this is a very interesting time to ask that question, right? Because of what is happening in the world, what we're seeing unfold with our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and then here domestically, the response that we're seeing of not just the government or the lack of response, but also on college campuses, right? We're hearing about how student organizations, Muslims or any kind of pro-Palestinian student organizations, are being silenced. They're being, quieted. I just read, I think yesterday, that I forget which university, I think it's Columbia University here in New York, that is basically suspending Jewish Voices for Peace and the Muslim Students for Justice in Palestine, I believe, because of some of their actions. So, for Muslim students, it's a very heightened time. I won't say unique, because I think it's some of the things that have always been there in terms of the challenges that are unique to Muslims that have always been there are now just kind of coming to the surface and becoming very blatant. And so we're seeing, this discrimination, microaggressions, macroaggressions, right, on campus. We're seeing a lot of, misrepresentation of Muslim students. We're seeing a lot of, animosity or, people going blatantly against any representation or awareness of Islam. There's a lot of conflation of and misrepresentation of what it means to be pro-Palestinian, what it now means to be Muslim, what it means to look Muslim, what it means to wear symbols of Islam on a college campus. And so there's definitely a heightened level of discrimination and aggression towards Muslims now on campuses. That being said, that being like the big thing that's happening now, the other things that are the other piece of that goes hand in hand is the mental health piece, right? So in terms of how Muslim students are coping with all that's happening, there's definitely going to be a lot of mental health impact on these students. There's going to be a lot of questions about how to best navigate one's Muslim identity, right? So I was speaking to a parent yesterday, and this person said, I told my child to just be quiet, don't say anything, kind of fly under the radar. And then students are going to say, well, no, I want to speak up and I want to have a voice. And that's part of their identity. Growing up in the West, we learn to have a voice. And so there's also that piece of like the relationship with the family that's always been a thing, right? Like the generational differences. Even if a person's parents like grew up in the same country, the generational difference just with social media, all those things can cause such a rift between parents and children, especially college-aged children. I shouldn't say children, I should say young adults, really, who are learning to figure out who they are in a way that's independent of their parents, right? That's that's the time of life where that really comes to the surface. And so all of these issues are going to, or have always been there, and we're going to see them even more visibly now. In addition to that, the challenges and stressors that often are faced by Muslim students on campuses is in regards to their relationships. And by that, I mean romantic relationships. We've seen culturally, oftentimes there's a stress for people to kind of find a spouse during their college-aged years. And historically, that was kind of like the acceptable time to get married. We've seen that timeline kind of get later and later in a person's life, but that doesn't change the fact that stress can be there. The pressure maybe to get married, the pressure to start looking for a spouse can be there as well. And the last thing I'll say about that is, these are all things, culturally, but also on campus. The other religious stressor for, comes into play as well in terms of students figuring out their religious identity. What does it mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to be a Muslim now that they're not necessarily as connected to their family as they were prior to being in college or university? And so they're facing kind of figuring that out with who they are, and then, navigating judgments or just issues within the Muslim community as well. So this is another thing that comes up, I think, a lot for university students during the times that they're in their schooling.
Definitely, subhanallah. I would comment to this part that there is this sometimes there is this gap between being a youth especially in these days when you have access basically to almost everything, from information to like the easiness of the life that we are living in nowadays, I would say. And on the other hand, our parents who did not have most of these let's say benefits that today's youth is having. And sometimes especially when you're very young, you have this feeling that your parents cannot understand you, they don't understand that your struggles, that they don't know what you're facing right now, and how everything that is around you is this mainstream which is pushing you on one side, and then you come home and there are your parents who are speaking sometimes something that is completely different from what you see in your everyday life when you're at college, when you're at school, etc. So I'm very curious about knowing what are some of the things that, let's say, one person as a Muslim youth can try to kind of practice to try to balance this kind of struggle between what they see outside, which is sometimes very different from what they see at home? What are things that it can really help them out in kind of understanding themselves and kind of balancing between a home and outside community, if I may say that?
So to answer your question, I'm going to offer something that I offer to in many different, that's like a great thing to keep in mind in many situation or contexts, including the one that you're asking, which is that it would be really, really helpful for us to hold two realities at the same time, right? So as a college student, you can hold the reality that you're navigating the world in the way that it is now, asking questions that are relevant or coming up for you in this time, of just the world, right? And that your parents see things based on their history, their upbringing, how they navigated their challenges, which might be very different. And holding both of these, we can acknowledge that, yes, you can see they don't have full access to understanding fully what you're going through. Sure. But also, you don't have full access to the lifelong experiences and wisdom that they hold. And both of these are true at the same time. And I think if we can start there, it can help open up dialogue and curiosity for, okay, help me understand where you're coming from. I want to understand you, and I would like for you to understand me. And from an Islamic perspective, right, with due respect to parents who are really just trying to get you to see their perspective, right? And I'm not talking about situations that are like abusive or anything like that. I'm talking about just regular, normal, like conflict between parents and children, which is natural at this age, right? To say, okay, sit down, help me understand that. Where are you coming from on this? Because I don't see it, but I want to be able to. And we don't have to agree at the end. Listening to them and wanting to genuinely understand their perspective doesn't mean that you're giving in. It just means that you're saying, okay, like I get that. Yeah. And I'm also seeing this, this, and this. And so what do you think about this? Right? If you start listening first rather than just being in conflict, you'll see that it'll soften the conversation. It'll naturally help the other person listen to you as well.
SubhanAllah, definitely. But there is this, for example, sometimes there is this narrative from parents, let's say, that based on the Islamic, let's say, navigation of obedience to parents. And the youth may seem or feel like they are not understood if they speak up or they speak to their parents and they share their struggles, like that they feel like, okay, if I say this or if I don't agree with them, what if I'm disobeying my parents in that? So what could you give like as an advice to the youth, like if they are struggling with sharing their sometimes even the worst fears and sometimes even the hardest struggles with their parents in fear that they will not understand them well, or what if what I'm saying they're going to understanding, oh, I'm not obedient to you, or I'm not respecting you in the way that Islam asks me to, so to say.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an important question, but it's also a hard question to answer because, everyone's situation is different in terms of the relationship with their parents. I've seen relationships in which parents are genuinely just really unwilling to yield to their kids. And I've seen the opposite, where kids are absolutely unwilling to yield to their parents. I've seen situations in which this idea of obeying parents is used almost as emotional or spiritual blackmail. And I've seen, it kind of held on to by some people in terms of they will put up with abuse or injustice for fear because of that, right? Later on in life, it kind of becomes internalized. So it's hard to really give an answer without kind of starting with that nuance of like there are different situations, and we want to be really clear of not using Islam for spiritual blackmailing, right? That being said, again, I think if we can open up the conversations of holding both realities, and actually, before I say that, I want to also acknowledge that the fear of not being understood is probably one of the most painful things to go through as a young adult. Because developmentally, that's the time when our brain structure is like shifting so that we become more independent. But of course, we have attachment to our family. And to feel misunderstood or, to feel unaccepted is probably one of the most painful things that a person can experience. So I want to just highlight that. And again, this is not a one size fits all approach, but I would challenge young people to try, because it requires having hard conversations to understand and be understood, right? And so I would challenge young people to say, if you're afraid of not being understood, it might be worth maybe getting a mediator or maybe trying something different. Go to therapy yourself and say, how can I approach this conversation differently? And it's going to definitely be scary. And it's definitely going to feel like, nope, can't do that, right? But you won't know until you try. And sometimes, when we try something new, we are intending to try something new, like to have a conversation in a different way or to have a more productive conversation. And what happens is that our family member, in this case, a parent, they don't know that, right? So they start off being aggressive, or they start off being like, no, but if you just stick to it and stay calm, and you say, look, I hear you. Tell me about that. Let me understand that. Yes, you're right. Find something that you can tell the other person, yes, you're right. I see where you're coming from, right? If you can find that, ability within yourself to do that, that will guaranteed kind of soft, because they're going to be like, wait, hold on, wait. How can I fight you if you're telling me that I'm right, right? And so I would challenge this, young people to start by saying, I want to understand where you're coming from. Or if the parents start to, start saying things to them, start by saying, respond to them about something, anything that you can even agree with a little bit, or where you don't even maybe not agree with it, but you get it. Like, yeah, you know what? I see where you're coming from. Start there. Start with establishing common ground and then move from there. And the conversation, you'll see that slowly but surely how the conversation progresses will shift.
This reminds me of what you have already shared, like how listening is so important, and how actually like stepping outside of, let's say, just our own position, and maybe sometimes anger or frustration or the struggles that we're in, and just trying to listen to what the other side is saying, especially our parents. Sometimes, for example, understanding that in most cases, this is just like a general idea that the parents are those who really want to do well to us, and who want good for us, so to say. But maybe they were not trained, or they did not find a way to expressing themselves in a way that maybe we understand well. So we have to sometimes understand, okay, these like signs, okay, this is my, let's say, mom or the dad, this is her way of, or his way of saying I love you, or this is his way of saying I'm worried about you, this is his way or her way of saying I really care about you. But and it's just that the style or the way that they're sharing these ideas is something that we might not understand at a point. But definitely as time progresses, and especially when you come a parent on your own, you'll see, oh, this is what my parents meant by that, or this is how much they cared about me and I didn't even realize that.
Right.
On the other hand, if we can kind of, when we step outside our families, let's say, and as a Muslim youth, and we come to the college, and we want to achieve, sometimes based on the Islamic principles of, let's say, ihsan, the excellence in the effort, excellence in the standards, or excellence in the results that we want to achieve. And sometimes, especially when you're living in the West, especially when you're living in the USA, you see all of these things around you that are kind of sometimes very opposite of what you want to live in your life. So how would that this is the family. So when we come out of our comfort zone, let's say, or when we come out to the college and we're surrounded by people around us, how can we balance between striving to achieve, let's say, the the best academic success on one side, and to preserve and nurture our religious commitments, our religious identity, and that connection in the end with God.
Yeah. So, really, when I think about academic success and religious commitments, I see them as going hand in hand. And that's because if our intention is correct, then everything becomes an act of worship. So my pursuing an education is, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbi zidni ilma, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran, وَقُلْ Rabbi zidni ilma, and ask, oh Allah, increase me in knowledge, right? And the Prophet taught us a dua to say, Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a. Oh Allah, I ask you for beneficial knowledge, right? And so if the intention is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us to ask for knowledge, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Quran, He applauds or He commends people who have knowledge, people who use their intellect, people who, have that good sense, right? Then that is part of my becoming a better Muslim. And so it's about really recognizing the intention. Why am I striving here? What is it that is driving me to perform academically? Is it just for the grades? Because then we've got to check our intentions, right? If it's just to get the best job and just to have a lot of money, and I say just because that is such a small part of who we are as human beings, as Muslims, right? Our goals they should be so much more lofty, right? Beyond just getting a good education, getting a good job and living a comfortable life. Sure, that's nice, but we should be aiming much higher in terms of our benefit. How do we help? And again, I want to emphasize and bring to the forefront what we're seeing in the world today, right? What we're seeing unfold in Palestine. We're seeing people utilize platforms and education in whatever way they can to help contribute. Right? We have lawyers who are doing what they can. We have, activists who are doing what they can. And everyone is bringing their strength, whether it's knowledge-based or talent-based, to serve a cause. And that is living for something that is bigger than yourself, right? And we know Islamically, that's built into our deen. That's part of who we are. And in addition to that, there's also research that shows that when we have something in our life that is bigger than ourselves, that is actually a contributor to our own personal happiness, right? And so it's not only would having that intention of pleasing Allah, of serving mankind, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas," right? That you are the best of people and you have been brought forth for mankind, for people. You are benefactors of humanity. And so if we think about our academic success as a means to being benefactors of humanity, that is part and parcel of our religious commitments. That is part and parcel of who we are as Muslims, right? And so intention goes a very long way, and we want to check our intention and renew our intention every so often, right? The other thing that I will say is that it is important to be very intentional in keeping it balanced, in that, okay, we're spending hours studying for exams and going to classes and all those things, and we have to make sure that our actual Iman is being refreshed, that we are intentionally feeding our ruh, right? Our soul with Quran, with classes, with some kind of a connection to religious learning consistently. For those who are born Muslim, oftentimes we're taught the crux of what Islam is as a child. We go to every Jummah khutbah and that's it, right? We call it a day at that. But that's so important to actively be involved in your own spiritual nourishment consistently, right? And intentionally, because if we don't, then just like a plant that isn't watered is going to start to dry up, our ruh, our iman is also going to be affected negatively if we're not nourishing it. So both of those things I think are important, having the intention in seeking academic success, and then also intentionally incorporating and keeping consistent in some type of religious commitment or studies, whether it's memorizing Quran, whether it's attending a halaqah, whether it's taking a course, something that's consistently keeping you accountable.
Um, if I may add or share some of the struggles, for example, with some students that I or myself while I was studying as well, and that is like, for example, we want to live this uh, ideal or this value of ihsan, meaning doing something with excellence, doing something with the best that we can. But sometimes we try it when we understand the ihsan in a way that it's the best result in the end, and we don't receive that result in the end. We feel like, oh, does this mean that I did not do this with ihsan? Does this mean that Allah is not pleased with my deed? Like, how can someone balance that feeling of I have done this with ihsan, even though I may have not, let's say, fulfilled 100% an exam, or I have not done everything completely the way I thought in my head that it should be that way, so to say.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, there's a duality here as well, right? As you can see, I love duality because I think it just helps us see so much nuance. So the first piece of that is to really be self-reflective, right? To ask ourselves, did I really do it with ihsan? Right?
Mm.
Um, we live in a culture where it's like, this is who I am, being unapologetically me. And, it really kind of takes, and this is, among the younger generation now a lot, right? And that really takes away sometimes from self reflection and self improvement, right? And so there's a sense of like, well, I did the best I could, but okay, how can you do some muhasaba, right? Like, how can you check in and reflect within yourself to see if the efforts that you put in were the best efforts that you could put in, right? And then, so that's one side of it. The other side of it is, okay, you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, right? But is that the only measure of having done something with ihsan? We have to ask ourselves that, right? We want to think of, the various prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, right? Who, like Zakaria alayhi salam, he made dua for years. He was a prophet. He lived his life with ihsan, right? He was a prophet. And yet he made this dua for a child that it did not come to fruition until his old age, right? Does that mean that he wasn't doing it with ihsan? No. It just means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Hakim, that he is the wise, right? That he is al-Khabir. He has full know-how of everything and knowledge of what is best for us when it's best for us. Maybe that low score is what needed to happen in order to push us to propel us into more action. Maybe it was what needed to like help us pivot, right? We don't know that, but we have to trust that if we're doing it with ihsan and we check with ourselves to say, okay, where's my intention? Did I put in the right effort? What needs to happen here? And to trust that, we cannot impose our timeline or our limitations on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Just because I do everything right doesn't mean that everything's going to turn out the way that I want, right? So sometimes we have a very like 2 + 2 = 4 type of relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I do everything right, and if I am perfect, and I study and I pray and I fast and I do everything, that I'm going to get married by this age, have kids by this age, have a 6 or 7 figure income by this age, and have a house with a white picket fence by this age, right? For example, that might not be everyone's dream, but like we have this like plan that's laid out. And sometimes the best of us, those plans just they get thrown up in the air and they are completely different than anything we imagined, right? And that is what's best for us, for our dunya and our akhirah. And we have to remember that.
Exactly, subhanAllah. This is where aqidah, like the core of the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, really, really helps in, as you beautifully mentioned, subhanAllah. It's not, Allah does not owe us anything,
Right.
basically. And if we don't understand something at one point in our lives, even it may seem very hard and we're going through so many struggles, it doesn't mean that it's not good for us in the end. In the meantime, if I may share, sister, we have our viewers who are sending their questions in the chat, and I just wanted to give salams to those who are watching the webinar right now. May Allah reward you for joining us. I would like to share one question here, if you don't mind, from one of the participants or the viewers, and one of them said, I'm feeling really sad and helpless about the ongoing issues in Gaza, and it seems like we're not getting the support we need from our teachers. Any advice on how I can help my friends and teachers understand this crisis as a humanity issue and encourage more empathy?
So this is a college student asking this question.
Yes, that's how it looks like from the question.
Yeah, so this is it's a tough question, right? Can you read it to me one more time, please?
Of course, of course. Just a second. So she says, I believe it's she. Please forgive me if it's not, if I did not say it well. So the student said, "I'm feeling really sad and helpless about the ongoing issues in Gaza, and it seems like we're not getting the support we need from our teachers. Any advice on how I can help my friends and teachers understand this crisis as a humanity issue and encourage more empathy?" So she's struggling with presenting this ongoing issue or the struggle or the crisis, basically to receive more empathy and understanding from people, as they only understanding from one point of view and kind of are not willing to understand
Yeah.
the real issue that is going on.
So, all right, it's time for us to get real. Not that I haven't been real so far, but here's my answer to this question. The first piece is I want to acknowledge that seeing the catastrophe and this crisis and just the sheer inhumanity of not just what is happening to our Palestinian brothers and sisters, but the response of leadership is just it is mind blowing, right? On one hand, and on the other hand, it's like, what are we expecting, right? Like, what are we expecting from people who are in power because they want power, right? This is why a just leader has such a high rank in Islam, because power corrupts, right? And that's on every level. And so just leadership is highly, highly rewarded in Islam for that reason, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that human beings, when they come into power, they have the likelihood to become unjust and to diminish the value of human life also increases. So I want to just kind of highlight that yeah, it is heartbreaking, and yet again, as Muslims, we have to keep the bigger picture in mind. Okay, this is not the first time in history that something like this has happened. The difference is, number one, it's happening during our lifetime, and number two, even more so, that it is unfolding in front of our very eyes. We are seeing things live as they unfold. We are witnessing, quite literally, everything that's happening, this genocide and this, mass exodus of the people in Gaza. And historically, we've been seeing what happens to, people, not just in Palestine, but we're seeing the Congo, we're seeing Sudan, we're seeing, so many of these places that are just, right now undergoing such brutality. It is not the first time in life that this has happened. And as Muslims, while our heart bleeds as it should, we also keep in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the just, that He is al-Hasib, that He is al-Malik, that He is the wise, that He has power, that He has might, and that this is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, and nothing happens without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, that these people have been given power, and the more they abuse it, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grasp comes on them, there's going to be no escape, right? And so we take solace in knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves them more than we love them, right? And so that should help us on some level have hope, right? And I would highly, highly encourage all of us to, our shuyukh are doing an amazing job at putting out content that is very much, geared towards helping us cope and have hope, right? That being said, again, when it comes to like teachers are not supporting us, my comment to them, this is why I said it's time to get real, is like, what do you expect? Right? Like, we live at a time where everyone's talking about like being allies and this and that. But like, really, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, right? You'll have, of course, teachers who are going to be supportive and helpful, and that's all great. Now, we have to remember that our strength, that our courage, that our contentment, that peace of mind and solace in our hearts does not come from the support that we're getting from any of these people. It's nice to see it, sure, absolutely. But that should not be our source of courage and solace. Our source of courage and solace is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost. And then we find our communities where we have that, complete, full, like everyone is on the same page. And we listen to these lectures that are helping us from an Islamic lens gain hope, right? Be more hopeful, right? And then when we go into these settings where people are not supporting us, number one, I'm just going to say this straight out. Don't expect to be supported. I mean, realistically speaking, because you're going to be let down most of the time. Maybe not all the time. It also depends what institution. It also depends who it but don't go in expecting it, right? And, in terms of how do I help people see, we have to use a lot of wisdom. We have to use, and I'm going to encourage every single person who's watching this, especially college students, to use discernment, to be wise in what you say, who you say it to, how you say it, right? All of these things matter. Your word choice matters, right? And, so like, for example, there's just locally here in New York, there's an MSA. I don't know exactly if they reposted something or liked something that was, I didn't see personally what they liked or whatever, but I know like friends of mine said I could see why it's problematic. But the university called in the NYPD to take a look at this, right? To investigate. It's an unnecessary, intimidation tactic that's being used by the university. But also, there are some, again, the online interaction, a Muslim parent is looking and saying, I can see why it's problematic, right? And so I don't want to tell anyone to shy away or not have a voice. Have a voice, but use it with wisdom. Use it with discernment. You don't have to say all the things all the time to everybody, right? That being said, the other thing I'm going to say is learn to gauge if someone is willing to listen to you or if they're just in it for the debate, right? If their mind is made up, their mind is made up, right? You can have all the facts and you can get into a debate, but be very, very clear, right? With what is this conversation? There are going to be people who are going to spew hatred and who are just so hell-bent on their narrative that there's just really, it's like talking to a brick wall. Don't engage with them. Don't waste your energy there. Don't waste, because that's just going to give you the opportunity and to like fight with them. You're going to get nowhere. You're going to leave more agitated. You're going to leave angry. There's just really zero benefit with engaging in them. There are some people who want to have a debate. If you want to engage that, sure. But make sure you know what you're getting into. Don't go into it hot-headed. Don't go into it like in a rage and like wanting to like put them down. Go into it equipped with facts, equipped with history. Make sure that you're reading up, that you're not just going into it like just, saying anything. Educate yourself, right? And then the third thing is if someone is actually willing to listen and they're like, well, I don't know anything about this and I'm learning, then offer yourself as a resource, sure. But again, make sure you're educating yourself, right? I'm not going to go through the resources right now, but there's so many resources out there, both, in terms of like historical resources, right? There are like books by Palestinian authors. There are books by Israeli historians, right? Ilan Pappé being one of them, right? There are, people who are in prestigious positions who document the history of it factually, right? I would read everything by Palestinian authors, but I would present information and evidence from the Israeli side that says, yeah, no, this is occupation, this is an apartheid, this is not a democracy, right? All of these things that's coming from their side, right? And use that to help people see what your perspective is. But again, it's going to be really important to discern, to be wise, to not go into it in a hot-headed emotional way, because that's kind of the goal. If people can press your buttons and get you to just, unleash, yeah, look at these crazy Muslims. Yeah, look. And then if you start using vulgar language, you start spewing, and then you start spewing or saying things that are hateful, or, we keep saying, oh, this is not anti-Semitic, and it's not. But if you say, oh, these Jews, just say it once. That's it. Everything else you've said is null and void, right? Mm-hmm. So be very measured, be very not cautious. I'm not going to say cautious. I don't want anyone to be afraid, but I want you to be wise. I want you to be, to be discerning in your speech, in how you post online, what you post online, and know who your audience is, because that's going to be really important for you to know how your energy is going to be used.
Such a beautiful response. SubhanAllah, may Allah reward you. I will just there's this beautiful definition of wisdom that I heard the other day, and it says wisdom is knowing what to say, when to say it, how to say it, and to whom to say it. And maybe this can, inshallah, help in changing and preparing for any debates or any types of conversation, especially for the student who has reached out to us. Also, it may be useful to know that there is a compelling video series that explains the current crisis in Palestine that is being prepared, or that has been prepared by Muslim Minutes. So inshallah, you can check out the YouTube videos there, and that can hopefully help you further preparing and knowing about this the history of it, and the true conflict that is there. I would like to continue on, because this also is kind of something that is related to what we have been just talking about, and that is it's not about the Palestine, but it's generally about mental health stigma in general. So meaning, if there is a student who is having issues or mental related issues, and if he or she shares it in their communities, they very often find that a very different types of responses. Let's just put it that way. Sometimes promising, and many times it's very, very hard and stigmatizing, as it's not very well accepted as generally as an issue, so to say, for the Muslim youth nowadays. So my question is, how can Muslim students in general address mental health stigma in their communities, and how to find that necessary support that they need to kind of navigate through those types of issues in their lives?
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually going to say that the answer to this is going to be similar to the last one, right? Is that when we're talking about mental health issues or mental health struggles, you want to use discernment. You're not going to talk to everyone everywhere about what's happening, right? Don't just walk around telling everyone, oh, I'm so depressed, or I struggle with anxiety, right? There's a time and place, and there's, and certain people that you can talk to and that you should talk to, right? It's a real shame, but it's an unfortunate truth that a lot of times, I think college students don't feel comfortable telling their family members. And I think that tide is shifting, in a much more positive way. So there's still definitely more work that needs to be done in that area of reducing mental health stigma in the, in the grand scheme of things within the community. But, if you're struggling, they have mental health services on campus. Depending on where you go to school, of course, this is very, very dependent on the amount of support for Muslim students that there is on campus. Depends where I would imagine, and despite, a lot of the adverse things I'm seeing coming out of the university campuses in New York, there's a larger population of Muslim students. So I think, like, for example, NYU has the Islamic Center at NYU. It's a very strong presence, right? I know, like, in California, you've got the Muslim Mental Health Lab. Dr. Rania Awad is there. And so there are, like, hubs of, places, some universities where there's a lot of Muslim mental health support. However, generally speaking, universities do have mental health resources. So that's a good first step. Now, again, with the current crisis, I have to acknowledge that, those resources may not necessarily be as useful, right? They might not be the most helpful. But I would say that's a good place to start. And then again, like many things, we have to find our community, find places where it's where we can normalize conversations around mental health. There are also resources like, for example, the Ruh app, RUH, has been made by Muslims it's a support for mental health. They've got some resources on there to find practitioners as well, right? And then there are also like reduced fee platforms where you can find, if not Muslim, at least, people of color, people who are more culturally literate, to help, that has like reduced fee options, right? Or insurance-based options. And so I would highly recommend that if you're struggling with mental health related stuff, start with some of the free resources like the Ruh app, but also look for a therapist, ideally someone who, has a similar background, only because they'll understand. And I would say similar background specifically now with the current issue, because you can't go to, a therapist randomly and be like, well, I'm pro-Palestinian. If they're staunchly is like pro-Israel or Zionist, it's not a good fit, right? So in that sense, if that's what it is, then I would say try to find resources that are grounded in understanding Muslim mental health experience. However, there are resources out there. I would say don't hesitate to look them up. You can find things that are either free or low budget. Even if they're not Muslim, you want to find something that's a little bit more diverse, so that you can assume that there's a little bit more of an understanding and nuance to that.
SubhanAllah. We have talked about different types of challenges and issues that Muslim youth are facing nowadays, especially in college. Out of these, or maybe if you want to add on it, what are some of the areas that you would say that are priority regarding how we should address them, and how we should prioritize them in addressing these challenges in the Muslim college with Muslim college students? How we can foster a more inclusive educational environment on a collective, so to say, level, so that they feel comfortable, that they can thrive really spiritually, that they can thrive academically in all of these different fields that they want to succeed in.
What I would love to see is mentorship programs on college campuses. I think that would be a wonderful, way to help students in college kind of connect with either people who are freshly have recently graduated, or who are working in fields that they are interested in. That is a big picture thing that is really, really ideal. I think it would take a lot of work in terms of people who are mentors to understand and to be on board with having a mentee in a college student. So I think that would be really nice if in an ideal world, if we could have that kind of a system set up with the local masajid that are local to the universities. But in addition, again, thinking of how can we go about this? And this might be something that maybe the generation that's in college now can think about, once they're out of college, maybe they can start something like this. But having a collaborative approach, right? So similar to what I said about parents and children, having that willingness to talk to each other, not talk at each other, right? Similarly, I think in order to help, in terms of resources as a community, we need to work collaboratively as adults who are, in the community. We want to work with college students to understand the types of resources that they need, and what kind of support they're looking for, where are the places where they're struggling, and to offer them that kind of support that's grounded in saying, okay, yes, I want to hear you, but here's the wisdom that I'm bringing to this as a person who's older. How do we kind of work together and lift each other up, as opposed to it having to be a conflict or just like, oh, these college students, kind of a dismissive approach, and college students being like that towards elders and like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So that collaboration, I think, is a really important piece to help foster that inclusivity.
Somehow that's such an important thing, because very often what is like especially happening with the with the youth in general, is that they see the elders as, okay, they're too old, they don't know what what they're saying, they don't know where I'm living and what type of a society I'm living in.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, like the elders sometimes see the youth as too not, so to say, aware of the situation, not aware of very kind of the life that they're living in, and to willing living it without fearless, so to say, so much. But there is such a, when you compare the two, or when you combine the two, there's this beauty of the combination of the strength and the force of the youth, and on one hand, and on the other hand, the wisdom, so to say, and the knowledge and the experience of the generally the mentors and the elder population. I would like you to ask you, what it would be your like key advice in the end that you would like to offer to both Muslim college students and their supporters on the other hand, to help them really thrive amid these really unique stressors, circumstances that we're living in, and in general, the life or their goals that they want to achieve.
So I would actually, to answer that question, echo what you just said, right? The importance of actually working together, right? It's so important for us to create and foster and nurture community right now. Like, it's always important, but we really, really need it now, right? And so we want to, work together to create spaces where college students can come together, where adults can come together, and where college students and adults can come together with each other as well, right? And we want to create forums where, both, sides are willing to listen to each other, right? Because the reality is that both the young adults, college students, and, adults who are older in age have something to offer. They truly do, right? It's not fair for people who are a little bit more advanced in age to say these college kids don't know anything. No, they know a lot. And actually, developmentally, where the brain is, right, especially like the earlier college years before the brain is fully developed, right, that's an age where there's a lot of innovative thinking, where there's the ability to like see things outside of the lines that we draw for ourselves when we get a little bit older, right? There's this ability to see things and to step out of the boxes that we create, and there's something so valuable about that. And there's something so valuable about wisdom and experience and understanding the ins and outs of life, right? That we want to take the strengths of both sides, right, and use them together, and that's when we can create something really, really beautiful. And so I would say, learning to work together and creating forums where there can be collaboration, conversation, where everyone is willing to listen to each other, willing to disagree with each other and not take it personally. If you don't agree with me, you're a young college student, you don't agree with me, I'm not going to be offended and say you're being disrespectful. I'm going to say, okay, yeah, you don't see it from this perspective yet. And you may never, because you live in a different time, or you may get older and be like, oh, I remember what she used to say, right? And that's okay. That's okay. Right. And so learning to not be so offended by each other, but to create these forums for communication and collaboration and community, it would be the best advice that I can give.
SubhanAllah, may Allah reward you. This was such an inspirational discussion, and such inspirational uh, moments and ideas, and many things that you have shared with us. I would just like to give you the space in the end to ask if there's anything else that you would like to add to the topic, or if you think that we missed something very important among what we have discussed before, just to give you that space if you would like to add anything that I may not have asked, or that is important to mention.
I want to emphasize, it's not that we haven't mentioned it, but I want to just emphasize that it's so important in terms of building our identity. And again, now, even more so than before, to really, really connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? As we navigate the ins and outs, right? Like I think about myself, I have like my work bubble, and I'm a therapist, and so I have my practice, and so I can really control when, where, how much I interact with like, a more vast circle of people. But when you're in college, you're in it. You're like really, really in it. And if you're working in corporate and stuff like that too, but still, it's so important for us to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to really be cemented and deeply rooted in our personality and who we are, right? To be able to walk with a tall spine and to not cower when people try to shut off our voices. We really, really need to be grounded in that to have success in any area of life. And if there's one takeaway that I want everyone to take from today, it's to say, how do I connect better with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do I start learning about the names and attributes of Allah? Do I start to learn about what I'm saying in my salah so that it's more meaningful for me? Do I start to recite or memorize more Quran? Right? Do I get involved in, humanitarian efforts, or do I, maybe give a little bit more charity even if I feel a little bit of a pinch, right? Do I have to learn financial literacy so that I can afford to give more charity because I'm smarter with my money, right? So each one of us needs to really consider where our voids are in terms of our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we can do that, then we'll have the ability to discern, the choices that we make. We will find that our hearts lead us to decisions that are best for us, even if it feels like that's not the exact way we want it to go. And then later we see, oh, that was actually the right decision for me, right? And so that's the thing that I want to emphasize and bring to the forefront before we wrap up.
Such a beautiful, and I believe that that's something that beautifully wraps up everything that we have discussed before. And if we want the strength in navigating in the conversation and discussions with our parents, with our teachers, in the communities, in discussing all of these topics that we have discussed today, having that spirituality and the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what truly, truly brings the strength to our beings, and the strength to our, in both mentally and in any way possible that we can imagine. SubhanAllah, may Allah make us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us among those who are loved by Him, and who are going to be very close to Him on the Day of Judgment. Finally, I just would like to ask you if you can just share with us where can our participants, where they can find you, inshallah, on social media, where they can follow you.
Sure. So my social media handle is just on Instagram. It's my first and last name, Menahal_Begawala. I also have the Instagram page for my practice, which is Haven Counseling NYC. So it's Haven, HAVEN_counseling_NYC. And then my website for it's my website for my practice, which is Haven, HAVEN MHC, which stands for Mental Health Counseling. So havenmhc.com.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah reward you, Sister Menahal. May Allah bless you and protect you. And may Allah reward you once again for bringing such beautiful, beautiful ideas, and sharing these really inspiring ideas with all of us that can, inshallah, help us navigate through the challenges that we're facing right now as a Muslim ummah, and also as students at college, inshallah. May Allah reward you once again. To all of us who have been following us through the last hour or so, may Allah reward you for joining us. And we really hope that you have benefited from today's webinar. We hope that you will tune in for inshallah, our next content that we're going to share. As I said at the beginning, for more information, please, you can follow Muslim Minute at Instagram, Muslim Minute, and they're also on YouTube, where you can find a lot of content, video content that is regarding especially these challenges that we're facing right now. And where you can learn more about Islam in general. Finally, alhamdulillah for this beautiful day, for this beautiful webinar. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.